What's up, guys? This is Chris from Draftdashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 2 Final Look. These picks apply for Draftkings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. Okay guys, we're gonna do this a little different this week. This is for the main slate this afternoon, Week 2 NFL DFS. I'm gonna go through each position and just kind of talk about the players that I like, and then at the end of this video, I'm gonna show you the lineup building process that I use to make my lineups this week. Okay, so at the quarterback position, Tom Brady still sticks out. He's got the best matchup here versus the Miami Dolphins that got torched by the Baltimore Ravens last week. A lot of people are overthinking this one, thinking that the Patriots are going to blow them out, so Tom Brady's not going to need to be out there or throwing passes. If you look back historically, in games that Tom Brady was a super favorite, he's favored by 18.5 points. He has knockout games. He's going to be the guy out there. If they're going to win by 18.5 points, he's going to have 3 or 4 touchdowns. He's only $6,400 DraftKings salary and $1,400 more on FanDuel. So don't overthink this one. Tom Brady's only projected to be 9% owned. So I think this is a great way to differentiate your lineups with a nice safe floor play here and a guy that's got huge upside. I think a lot of people are going to look back in hindsight after this week and say, why the heck didn't I play Tom Brady? He was in a smash spot, his price was right, so I'm not sure why so many people are fading this one. So I like Tom Brady here versus a terrible Miami defense. So right under Tom Brady, I like Dak Prescott from the Dallas Cowboys playing another bad defense in the Washington Redskins. Dak put up 36 fantasy points last week. He had 4 rush attempts, and he's only going to be 3% owned. He could have another big week. The matchup is right. I think, again, people may just be scared of the blowout versus Washington, but I think Dak has another solid week. He's projected at 19.7 fantasy points this week, so I like Dak Prescott here versus the Washington Redskins. And down here at only 5,300, I think this is a great value play at quarterback. I like Josh Allen from the Buffalo Bills playing the New York Giants. The Giants got a really bad defense. They gave up the second most fantasy points last week and the second most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Josh Allen is only projected to be 6% owned. So this is another low-owned quarterback play that's got a fantastic matchup. He scored 20 fantasy points last week and he had 10 rush attempts. So if he connects on a couple of his passes, scores a couple touchdowns, with 10 rush attempts, he could go for 80 yards and a touchdown and just have a fantastic fantasy day. Low ownership, the price is low, so you have plenty of salary left over for the other positions, and he's going to make your lineup different. So I like Josh Allen for the Buffalo Bills here versus the New York Giants. Okay, let's take a look at the running backs. Alvin Kamara is my top stud of the week. He's $8,200 DraftKings salary. He's $500 more on FanDuel. He's got a great matchup here. The LA Rams gave up the second most fantasy points to opposing running backs in Week 1. Alvin Kamara scored 24 fantasy points on 13 rushes and 8 pass attempts. He's going to be chalk, 28% owned, but I think that ownership is justified here. He's got a smash matchup. He should be able to destroy the Rams on the ground and through the air. And I still like Derrick Henry down at $6,000 DraftKings salary, $1,500 more on FanDuel. He's got a great matchup versus the Indianapolis Colts, who gave up the most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Derrick Henry scored 29 fantasy points last week. He had 19 rush attempts and 2 targets. He's only projected to be 6% owned. With a matchup like this, the game script could easily go in his favor here versus a bad Indianapolis team. It's a home game for Derrick Henry. He had a phenomenal Week 1. I think that momentum continues into Week 2. So I like Derrick Henry here versus the Indianapolis Colts. Another guy people seem to be ignoring is Marlon Mack on the other side of the ball for the Indianapolis Colts playing the Tennessee Titans. The Titans have a good defense overall, but they gave up the 12th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Marlon Mack had 25 rush attempts last week, and he scored 28 fantasy points. he was on the field for 76% of the snaps and touched the ball 52% of that time. So with only 2% ownership and only $5,900 DraftKings salary and $1,500 more on FanDuel, I'm going to take a shot on Marlon Mack here. So I like Marlon Mack here versus the Tennessee Titans. And this guy's going to be chalk, but just don't forget to play some Josh Jacobs from the Oakland Raiders playing the Kansas City Chiefs. He's only $4,700 DraftKings salary, $1,800 more on FanDuel. He had 23 rush attempts last week, 1 pass target, scored 24 fantasy points. His ownership is really high. It's going to be around 35-37%. He was on the field for 74% of the snaps and touched the ball 56% of that time. So he's going to get a ton of action, and at $4,700, he doesn't need to do much to hit value. He's projected at 16.3 fantasy points here in week 2, so I like Josh Jacobs here versus the Kansas City Chiefs. And another guy who I like, Rex Burkhead, only 2% owned and only $3,800 DraftKings salary. He's got a fantastic matchup here versus the Miami Dolphins, and for all those people that think it is going to be a blowout over there in New England, Rex Burkhead is going to see some work. He had 8 rush attempts and 8 targets last week, scored 14 fantasy points. He was on the field for 46% of the snaps and touched the ball 50% of that time. So at 2% ownership, I think he's a great play to differentiate your lineup and open salary for other players. So I like Rex Burkhead here versus the Miami Dolphins. If you want to get super risky, I liked Carlos Hyde from the Houston Texans playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, who haven't done much to stop running backs yet this year. This is a home game for Hyde. He's going to be super low owned, under 1%. He was on the field for 37% of the snaps, but touched the ball 44% of that time. He kept doing that feed me sign out there, and that means give me the ball. And I think they do here in week 2 versus Jacksonville Jaguars. Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. At the top, I like Amari Cooper for $7,400 DraftKings salary. He's $400 more on FanDuel. He's got a great matchup here versus the Washington Redskins, who gave up the second most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers in week 1. Amari Cooper scored 26 fantasy points last week off of 9 pass targets. He was on the field for 76% of the snaps, touched the ball 17% of that time. He's going to be about 9% owned, so not super chalky. A guy that you know is going to be involved. He's got the talent. He can catch a deep ball, score a touchdown. He should be plenty involved in this offense. So I like Amari Cooper for the Dallas Cowboys playing the Washington Redskins. And I'm not so hyped up on Sammy Watkins. They really jacked his price up. So he's got to go out there and score a couple of touchdowns for you to make you happy. If he's going to have really high ownership, about 21%, but I don't blame you for playing him. I'm going to have him in a few lineups. He's projected at 18.2 fantasy points here in week 2. He's not going to get you the 50 fantasy points that he got you last week, but he could get the job done for you here. I'm going to be under the 20% ownership, and I still like Julian Edelman for the New England Patriots playing this bad Miami defense. If you're going to play Tom Brady, you're going to want to pair him with either Julian Edelman or Josh Gordon. Those are going to be the guys primarily involved in this pass offense. Edelman scored 16 fantasy points last week off of 11 pass targets. He's going to be about 8% owned. He was on the field for 96% of the snaps, touched the ball 19% of that time. So he's a big part of that New England offense. There's no doubt he's one of Tom Brady's favorite targets. So I think Edelman has another big game here. I like Julian Edelman here versus this bad Miami defense. So Robert Woods and Brandon Cooks, they're about the same price. They got great matchups, and I think they have good weeks here in week 2. It's just hard to know which guy is going to have the bigger night. Could be Brandon Cooks, could be Robert Woods. It could even be Cooper Kupp down there at 6,000. Cooper Kupp got 10 targets last week. Brandon Cooks got 6 targets, and Robert Woods got 13 targets. Those targets are going to be distributed between those 3 guys each week, and it's going to be hard to know where those are going. I like them all if you can pick the right one. Okay, at the tight end position, Travis Kelce at the top. He's $7,300 DraftKings salary, $700 more on FanDuel. Of course, he's a great play. The problem is having enough salary to fit him into your lineup. He's going to be about 23% owned. I'll probably be a little under that, about 10-15%. He had 12 fantasy points last week on 8 pass targets, but he's a guy that could go for 20 plus fantasy points any given week. He's matchup proof, so of course I like Travis Kelce. But Evan Ingram, a guy that's only $5,200 DraftKings salary, he's $1,200 more on FanDuel. He got 14 targets last week, scored 32 fantasy points. He's only going to have 9% ownership. So if you want a lower ownership play that's going to save you some salary, a guy that should be involved in one of the main targets in that Eli Manning New York Giants pass offense. They don't have much over there. Evan Ingram is their guy. So I like Evan Ingram for the New York Giants here playing the Buffalo Bills. And then Mark Andrews, the tight end for the Baltimore Ravens, playing the Arizona Cardinals. He's only $3,800 DraftKings salary. He's projected at 12 fantasy points this week. He's only going to be 3% owned, on the field for 42% of the snaps. He touched the ball 25% of that time. He seems to have a great connection with Lamar Jackson, so I like the price. So I think Mark Andrews can be a nice value play at tight end for you here in week 2. Don't forget TJ Hawkinson, the tight end from the Detroit Lions, playing the LA Chargers. He's only $3,000 DraftKings salary, projected at 11 fantasy points this week. He scored 28 fantasy points last week off of 9 targets. He's going to be about 15% owned. He was on the field for 73% of the snaps, touched the ball 14% of that time. So he's another value play that you can fit in there to open up your salary at the other positions. And then one of my favorite tight end plays of the week, Darren Waller from the Oakland Raiders playing the Kansas City Chiefs. Darren Waller scored 14 fantasy points on 8 pass targets last week. He's going to be chalk, around 31% ownership. He was on the field for 100% of the snaps, touched the ball 14% of that time, and he looked good out there. He's the replacement for Jared Cook, and they're going to make him a big part of this offense. So I like Darren Waller for the Oakland Raiders here versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Okay guys, so we've gone over some of the players that I'm interested in for my lineup building process here in week 2 NFL. So you see there's this red target icon next to the players that I'm interested in playing. That essentially is my player pool. We call it the watched players list. It's players that you're watching that you want to play in your lineups. So I'm going to go to my watched players page just to show you all the players that I've marked on my watched players list. There's a setting that allows you to go through and set custom exposures. So if you're using the mass lineup generator, it will only use the player based on the exposure that you set. You can also set the mass lineup generator to create lineups only using the players in your watched players list. We had a bug in this earlier in the season. That's fixed now, so go ahead and try that out. It works perfectly. Okay, so we've got an extensive watched players list here, 63 players this week that I feel comfortable with putting in my lineups. So now let's go to the lineup optimizer. You can see there's 63 players in my watched players list. Those are the players that it's trying to fit into this lineup by default when it generates. So in this case, I'm not just going to go through and save random lineups. I'm going to use the tools to build a lineup with players that I know I want to play. So at quarterback, I want to get some Tom Brady in there. I'm going to go to Tom Brady and I'm going to lock him in. And then I want a pass catcher from Tom Brady to add some correlation to this lineup. So we have Josh Gordon here. I'm going to lock him in. Okay, now I like Chris Carson. I like Derrick Henry. But one of the staple running backs to my lineups this week, I want Alvin Kamara in there. So I'm going to lock him in. Okay, so at the tight end position, I really like the value of Darren Waller. He's only $3,300 DraftKings salary. So I'm going to lock him in. Now, we don't want to lock too many players in. What I've done is just locked in a core 4. So 4 of my top players that I think are going to perform this week based on their salary and their game script and all the other research I've done using these tools. So now when we randomize the lineup, it's going to use those 4 players that we locked in as the core. And it's going to populate the remaining positions with players from our watch list. So these are the guys that we already know we wanted to play. We see their ownership right here, their projected ownership, and we see how many upgrades we have available. So we have some salary on the table. We could go to Giovanni Bernard or Aaron Jones, or we could come down to Josh Jacobs. So now that opens up our salary. We have $800 left over. Let's see if we want to do anything with it. Let's see what we can do with our defense here. The Titans defense playing that bad Indianapolis team could be a good spot. So I like this lineup. We got Tom Brady, Alvin Kamara, Josh Jacobs, Josh Gordon, John Brown, Keenan Allen, Darren Waller, Michael Gallup, and the Tennessee Titans defense. We've left 100 on the table, so let's save this lineup and let's randomize again. Okay, so this lineup, it used Damian Williams, who I think's in a great spot versus Oakland this week. Oh, and Austin Eckler down here in the flex position to give us some safety at running back with big upside. D.D. Westbrook, he's only going to be 1% owned, so that's a risky play. Let's see if we can upgrade him here. We could go to Michael Gallup, but we just used that player. What about Mecole Hardman? This could be a guy that goes off this week. If it's not Sammy Watkins, it could be Mecole Hardman. So that leaves us with 1,100 salary left. I think we got to upgrade this defense. Vikings could put on a show versus Green Bay. It's really hard to know with defenses. But I like this lineup right here, leaving 200 salary on the table. It's got a nice core, nice supporting players. So we'll save that lineup. Now you can go through here one by one, randomize, generate lineups, upgrade players, change the lineup how you want it, save it, and then you can access it from your My Saved Lineups page, and you can export it to Draftkings and FanDuel. But we're not going to get into that right now. We have a help video that shows you exactly how to do it. I want to show you the mass lineup generator real quick because we just fixed that issue with the watched players. So we've got a nice 63 player pool here. 63 watched players, 63 players in our player pool, and we want to generate 100 lineups within 500 salary, and we don't want it to use any random players, so we're going to set this to none. We only want it to use players from our player pool that are in our watched players list. Unique players per lineup, we'll set this to 2, so each lineup is a little unique. 2 unique players per lineup. Minimum projected points, I'm not worried about because we're only using players on our watched players list. Max exposure, 25%. I think that's a good setting. You don't want to overexpose yourself to a player who might get injured or just have a bad game and then crush all those lineups. You can tap on this slider and enable max exposure per player if you want to go through each player and set max exposure, but we're not going to do that here. And now because we only wanted to use players from our watched players list, we're going to uncheck the automatically expand search if the pool is too narrow. So if it can't generate the 100 lineups based on our player pool, that's fine. I'll take whatever lineups it can generate. So let's go ahead and generate these lineups. Okay guys, the lineups are done. This is like opening up a crinkly pack of baseball trading cards looking for the rare or epic find. So we're going to go to see your lineups. So this is going to be 100 lineups that were just generated using the mass lineup generator, using only players from my watch list. The only exception to that rule is the defense, because the defense is so hard to predict and we don't want to use that as a limiting factor to making your lineups. So here we go, we got 100 lineups using only players from the watch players list. This is a nice Josh Allen, John Brown lineup with Josh Allen, Austin Eckler, Saquon Barkley, Tyrell Williams, John Brown, Mecole Hardman, Jimmy Graham, Michael Thomas, and the Packers. That's a nice GPP lineup. You can go through here and select the lineups that you want to play, and then you click Export Selected, and those lineups are going to go into a file on your computer that you then upload to Draftkings or FanDuel. And see, we have a How to Export Lineups button right here. We have help buttons on every page that give you a video and show you exactly how to use our tools. We've just added a ton of features. We're adding a stacking feature. We're going to have it all over here. So you can see the list of exposures for all the players used in these 100 lineups here. And if we had that custom exposure setting enabled, we would actually be able to change our custom exposure here, lock them in, exclude them right here. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.